Hello, folks, friends, and movie lovers. Welcome back to the channel, to the latest instalment of the movies in review, and the final instalment of Let's Talk About Quiet Places, the series looking at the A Quiet Place series. I say final instalment, that is, the final instalment for now, because currently scheduled for 2025, a fourth instalment to the franchise, all being well, somewhat unsurprisingly called A Quiet Place 3, is scheduled for release. It is, as I understand it, a sequel to A Quiet Place 2, which would be good, as it would help progress the story towards a conclusion which has at present been left unresolved in my opinion. Until then, we can enjoy what is already there, and in reflection of the series in its present form as a whole, I must admit that I quite enjoyed them. I thought it was a novel idea to have a series where the dominant feature, at least in A Quiet Place 1 and A Quiet Place 2, is the absence of voices and spoken word, which fit the narrative of attempting to avoid the aliens by not making a noise. That being said, I think it was beneficial to have A Quiet Place Day 1 to fill in the backstory of the invasion and provide a glimmer of how life was beforehand. A friend commented, why didn't they just start with Day 1? I can understand the point of her question because it does feel somewhat disjointed in the way that time has been handled in the series. A Quiet Place 1 starts 89 days, that's 3 months almost, after the invasion and progresses to almost a year and a half after the event. A Quiet Place 2 starts with Day 1 and jumps more than a year afterwards past the events of A Quiet Place 1. And the newest instalment brings us all the way back to Day 1 again. My only speculation in response to a question like that would be to fill in the backstory and try to provide some form of contextualization in an effort to set up future installments of the franchise. A Quiet Place Day 1 ties into A Quiet Place Day 2, which is the sequel of A Quiet Place 1. Given the story of 2 follows on from the end of 1, despite initially also starting on Day 1, probably a different perspective on the invasion from a different location and different characters. Something I highlighted previously was the references that can be drawn from other sources, other movies, stories, and so on. The strongest one for me was the War of the Worlds vibe, which was the story of Martians from Mars coming to invade Earth and totally overrunning the planet, only to be killed off by a cold or a flu virus, which we all have natural immunity to. Given the vibe, I sort of wonder whether something similar is planned for A Quiet Place 3, which I am led to believe will be the final instalment of the series. In a way, A Quiet Place 3 being the final instalment feels kind of fitting, because there aren't really too many other ways that the series could be developed further. Continuing the trend of drawing from other sources, they could always do an origins type story, as mentioned previously. However, inspiration could be drawn from the Rocky series and morph into a spin-off series with a different focus, characters, and chain of events, but is still related to the original series. Rocky, of course, spun off into Creed. The sitcom Only Fools and Horses had 2 spin-offs, The Green Green Grass and Rock and Chips. Another sitcom, Porridge, spun off into Going Straight, and so on. In many respects, this series has been really well constructed because while we can talk about each one in isolation, it would be extremely hard to do so without referencing the other installments, which for me is the marker of how well constructed they are as a series. In that regard, the series is comparable with the likes of Paranormal Activity, Scream and Halloween, where later installments always link back to the originals. Paranormal Activity does something very clever that is almost replicated here with A Quiet Place, in that the story of Paranormal Activity 1 sits within the story of Paranormal Activity 2, which is the progression of the story of Paranormal Activity 3. With Paranormal Activity 4, the Marked Ones and the Ghost Dimension all either progressing the story further and expanding upon it. I think A Quiet Place is trying to use a similar technique to tell this story. Has worked well, albeit making the timeline seem somewhat disjointed. All in all, I think this was a great series. I won't say it's my favourite, but I loved it all the same, and is a series I would happily recommend to people. I guess it's just waiting now to see what happens with A Quiet Place 3. It's said to be the final instalment, so can't wait to see how that plays out, and whether they have found any viable ideas for spin-offs, prequels and sequels, and origin stories. Okay folks, that's all I have for this one. Thank you for listening to the very end. If you haven't seen the other instalments for the Let's Talk Quiet Places, looking at the A Quiet Place series, please go check them out. You never know, they might be the movies that you enjoy. If you haven't already done so, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and click the bell icon for notifications and updates on when more reactions and reviews have been uploaded. My name is Simon and this is the Movies in Review. Thanks for listening.